This trauma presentation is presented by Sandy Kay and Christy Cundiff, life counselors at Glenver Middle School and Cave Spring High School.
What is trauma? It's extreme chronic or toxic stress that overwhelms a person's ability to cope and results in feeling vulnerable, helpless, and afraid. And there's no one true definition of trauma, really, because two people can share the same experience, one be traumatized and the other not. It can result from one event or a series of events. It can be witnessed or experienced directly. It's subjective, and it often interferes with relationships, self-regulation, fundamental beliefs about oneself, others, and one's place in the world. It's important to know that some people may not realize that an experience that they had is traumatic, but their body can see it as toxic stress, and the trauma realization may come out later. We refer to trauma a lot of times with big T's or little t's. A big T might refer to things like natural disasters, wars, serious car accidents with life-threatening injuries. And a little t is more personal, individualized trauma, such as interpersonal conflict, divorces. And what might be a big T for me might be a little t for someone else, or not a T at all. So we're going to take some moments to look at this video together. The truth about ACEs. And what are they? ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And this poster provides you with information regarding a study that was quoted as the most important public health study you've ever heard of. It originated in an obesity clinic after high rates of participants in the study continued to have success and then would drop out. So the research dug further. And this led to the mega study on adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Patients coming in for medical examinations and lab work were asked to participate in a questionnaire regarding past experiences, resulting in 17,000 participants. The questionnaire was focused on childhood trauma, different types of abuse, and family functioning. And the results were then compared to their current health records. So they were able then to document the current state of health and mental issues compared to what had gone on in childhood. The link listed there below, if you're interested in more information, you could click on that to find out more about ACEs, and the exact questionnaire would show you the questions that are asked. So again, ACEs strongly correlated for risk for disease and well-being throughout life, alcoholism and alcohol abuse, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, depression, financial stress, suicide attempts, adolescent pregnancy, and poor academic achievement. So in our schools, we are trained to be trauma-informed, and schools that are sensitive to ACEs recognize the prevalence and impact of traumatic occurrences in students' lives and create a flexible framework that provides universal supports, are sensitive to the unique needs of students, and mindful of avoiding re-traumatization. So what we work on is shifting our mindset, and parents can do this as well. We want to shift from things like, he doesn't really want to learn, to he's ready for a challenge, to be open and in a state of readiness. And from she knows what she did was wrong to maybe she's got a limited sense of cause and effect or limited self-efficacy. From he is so impulsive to maybe he has some delayed problem solving and inferring and social skills. And instead of she has a tantrum anytime she doesn't get what she wants, let's maybe consider the fact that she may have poor emotional regulation skills. So therefore then, they need to be taught. You can extend grace to a child for having a rough time or a rough morning and still hold the student accountable to high standards if a trusting relationship exists. Now we're going to take a look at this video called The Hand Model of the Brain to help explain some of what happens sometimes when we're experiencing stress.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child, and that's important to explain it to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
So again, the upstairs brain, or the thinking brain, is made up of the cerebral cortex and parts behind the forehead. And you may have heard of the upstairs brain. The many functions of this part of the brain are to communicate with the lower parts of the brain that provide self-protection and self-preservation. Again, the thinking brain is where planning, control over emotions, self-understanding, and empathy and morality take place. The downstairs brain, or the emotional brain, is where the brainstem and the limbic region are. That's the lower parts of the brain. Basic functions that happen there, breathing and blinking, and the innate reactions and impulses, fight, flight, and freeze. And remember, kids cannot access language when they are in their downstairs brain. Sometimes when kids get very upset and have strong emotional reactions, it can take as much as 30 minutes to get back to the upstairs brain. So again, the graph here shows the thinking brain, the top part, and the emotional brain, the bottom part, and the stress response system. The amygdala senses threat and sets off the alarm. The thinking brain assesses the situation. The thinking brain goes offline, so the emotional brain can activate fight, flight, and response. And then the thinking brain helps shut off that alarm and helps us to calm down. This is what happens typically in the normal stress response system. The stress response, or trauma-informed brain response, is when an experience becomes traumatic and it overwhelms our system for responding to stress. The emotional brain continues to sound the alarm and send messages to fight or flee, even after the threat has passed. And once the threat has passed, the thinking brain helps shut off the alarm and puts the brakes on to allow us to calm down and come back into balance. But with toxic stress, not every experience that sets off the stress response is traumatic. And an experience becomes traumatic when it overwhelms our system for responding to stress. So our attempts to fight or flee are not effective in preventing or managing the threat, and we are left feeling helpless, vulnerable, out of control. It's as if our foot is on the gas, but the car is stuck in neutral. And under these circumstances, the emotional brain continues to sound the alarm and send messages to fight or flee, even after the threat has passed. Traumatic events may have short and long-term effects on daily functioning. You may have heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response. Flight is escaping, wanting to leave the situation, avoiding the situation, walking away, or withdrawing. Fight is arguing, yelling, physically reacting. This is the aggressive phase. And freezing is when someone shuts down, maybe puts their head on the desk or hides, stops communicating, and feels unable to move or act. In school-age children, some common responses to trauma and toxic stress are listed here. Fear, anxiety, and worry, feelings of guilt, shame, and self-blame, headaches, stomach aches, nightmares and disrupted sleep, difficulty concentrating, angry outbursts and aggression and withdrawal, and over or under reactions to situations in the environment, such as sudden movements and loud noises, or physical contact. Sometimes adult caregivers with trauma histories have their own trauma-related triggers. So depending on what your experience might have been like, for example, maybe you had an experience in school that was traumatic, and just entering the building may trigger a fight or flight response. Other triggers may include feelings of shame or embarrassment about yourself or your children. Situations that leave adults feeling ashamed and helpless and frightened or out of control can remind you of past trauma and may trigger intense reactions. It's important to be aware of your own in working with your children. Common responses to trauma and toxic stress in adolescents are listed here. So as children start to get older, they tend to be more concerned about how others will view them after the event. They may withdraw from family, peers, and activities. And this is the age where a lot of times there's an increase in risk-taking behaviors such as alcohol and drug use, sexual behaviors, fighting, and sometimes self-harm. Risk and protective factors play a role in traumatic experiences, and the individual factors are history of a previous exposure to trauma. The more traumatic experiences a child has endured, the greater the risk for negative outcomes, including mental health issues. Risk and protective factors continued, pointing out the environmental factors. The nature of the traumatic event itself can influence how youth respond. Experiences like mass violence and human-made trauma such as war or terrorist attacks and interpersonal trauma seem to have a greater negative impact. And proximity to the traumatic event affects how youth respond. The closer and more direct exposure is associated with more intense post-trauma responses. Culture and ethnicity can influence how youth respond to traumatic events. And level of support influences how youth cope with traumatic events. Social support includes perceived support, actual support, and the quality of relationships. And social support is potentially one of the strongest protective factors in the face of trauma, as is a strong relationship with a caring, positive adult. This is one of the very most important protective factors for children: the parent-child relationship, parent mental health, and parental history of trauma. Also, the health of the broader community can influence a child's risk for and response to trauma. The impact on students' view of the world. So students who are traumatized or adults who have been traumatized, instead of having this typical development, thoughts like I live in a predictable and kind world, or I am worthy and hopeful, and I have the ability to impact and change my life, they may have more of a view of the world is not safe. People want to hurt me. I feel afraid. No one will help me. I am no good. I'm not smart. I'm not worthy. It will never get better. and I need to establish power and control. And this is when sometimes we see the power struggles at school. Teachers may get frustrated, and it's only because students are trying desperately to get some control over their life.
I get really mad when my brother hits me a lot. I don't like it when you say you don't want to play with me. When I'm mad, my brain can get a headache and it can start hurting. Your blood keeps pumping because you're like really mad. And you start to get sweaty because you're getting really, really mad. And then when you start getting really mad, you turn red. When your body can't really control yourself, mad just takes over your body. I just get out of control. It's kind of like if you had a jar and then the jar would be your brain and then you put glitter in the jar and that would be how you would feel like. If you shook up the jar and the glitter went everywhere, that would be how your mind looks. And it's like spinning around and then you don't have any time to think. And you sometimes punch stuff and people when you don't really mean it. When I get angry, I feel it in my heart. I really don't like when I get angry. The amygdala really reacts, but the prefrontal cortex tries to keep it down. When I feel like I want to, get really angry and yell, I just sometimes, take deep breaths. First you find a place where you can be alone, then you find some way to relax and calm down. When I need to calm down, I take deep breaths. I breathe in through my nose. Sometimes I close my eyes or just take deep breaths. It's calming down, it's not moving. It's slowing down and then it stops. And the heart pumps slow and then it goes into your brain. It's like all the sparkles are at the bottom of your brain. My brain slows down and then I feel more calm and then I'm ready to speak to that person.
When a child is triggered, you may see a flight, fight, or freeze response. If you see a fight response, it might look like acting out, being aggressive, acting overly silly, being defiant. Flight might be walking out of a room or withdrawing, not responding, lack of eye contact. Freezing might be you feel like they're not even in the room with you. These could be mechanisms in order to keep them safe. They may look like disrespect. It's an opportunity to say to your child, what are you feeling? In order to be able to discuss in a way that makes sense to you and your child, you need to make sure that you're both regulated. You may need some space or some quiet time before discussion or reflection of what may have happened. This could be going to separate parts of the house, just taking a 5-minute break before you come back to talk to one another. So in order to be regulated, you're at your calming state, your normal state. If you're dysregulated, your emotions are high, your anger is high, and we become very defensive. So what we want in order to have discussions and to be productive, we want that dysregulation to become regulation. And then that is when problem solving can occur. One of the freeze responses could be disassociation if you have trauma in your life. In order to be grounded, an exercise might be, what are 5 things you can see? What are 4 things you can hear? What are 3 things you can touch? What are 2 things you can smell? What is 1 thing you can taste? That brings you back to the present. That calms your mind and allows you to realize where you are in that moment. This is a great exercise you can do as a family so that when you become dysregulated or anytime in your life, it's a skill that you can use in order to calm down. It's a simple breathing technique. You breathe in for 4 counts. You hold for 4 counts. You breathe out for 4 counts. And you hold for 4 counts. Doing this 3 to 4 times will relax your body. Another exercise you can practice as a family is belly breathing. It's great for your brain and helps to clear the mind. You place one hand on your chest and the other on your belly. Inhale deeply through your nose for a count of 4, making sure your belly is expanding. Oftentimes that's uncomfortable because that's not what we're usually taught to do, but you want your belly to go out, to protrude. You continue this breathing cycle for a few minutes. You can feel the stress leave your body and often helps to reduce anxiety.
Resilience is the result of a highly interactive process between individual characteristics in the person and the environment in which that individual has developed.
It's really the counterbalancing of difficult things that may exist in the child's life with positive things that occur within the family, but even positive things that may exist in the community.
An easy way of thinking about resilience is like a scale with a fulcrum in the middle of it. And there are things on both sides of that scale, experiences of both bad things or good things.
Our genes shape where the fulcrum is positioned at the start.
There are certain genes that make a child more sensitive to the effects of maltreatment or parental neglect or witnessing violence.
The fulcrum may start out kind of more towards one side or more towards the other side, and that's going to make a big difference in terms of how much these subsequent events affect things positively or negatively.
Science tells us that experience moves the fulcrum, for better or for worse.
Even though we are born with genes, genes will respond differently to certain environmental situations as opposed to others.
What the genes are actually doing are turning up or turning down the expression of chemicals in circuits in the brain and the circuitry in the entire body that govern our responses to stress, to anxiety, to depressive symptoms.
When positive experiences accumulate and children learn coping skills that help them to manage stress, the fulcrum can slide, so the scale tilts toward positive outcomes more easily. That's what resilience is all about.
There's always an adult, or more than one adult, who is key to providing that relationship that helps to build resilience.
We all want to give our children what they need to grow to their full potential. And as parents, we play an important role in their development. But our parenting is affected by the supports and challenges in our lives, including experiences that cause what's known as toxic stress. Stress is called toxic when it doesn't let up, and there aren't supportive relationships to help us cope. That can make it hard to get through the day, let alone be the best caregivers we can be. The overwhelming burden of toxic stress can affect the health and well-being of adults. It can also affect the development of children in ways that can last a lifetime. Stress that puts us in a constant state of fight or flight can make it feel like we're always on edge, or like it's impossible to calm down. And these feelings can overload our ability to provide the supportive relationships that children need in order to thrive. Think of toxic stress as heavy cargo. Just as a truck can only haul so much weight before it stops moving forward, challenging life circumstances, like losing a job or not having a place to live, can weigh us down. And just as a truck can break down if it carries too much for too long, we too can wear down from being overburdened without the support we need. When toxic stress is related to things we can't control, like poverty, abuse, or racism, it can feel especially heavy to take on. But experiencing toxic stress doesn't have to determine who we are or how we act. And understanding how stress affects us can empower us to make change in our lives. There are things we can do to buffer ourselves and our children against the effects of even the most intense stress. Just as redistributing cargo from an overloaded truck can help it run again, supports and services, things like food pantries, job training programs, or even just talking with someone who cares, can help us focus on caring for ourselves and our children. And just as regular maintenance is required to keep a truck running, reliable access to community services can help us manage the load during challenging times. Reaching out to get support can be difficult, but things that might seem very small, like sitting and breathing deeply, playing I Spy with your child, or even sharing a walk or a snuggle, can make a difference. Over time, these small steps can build our resilience and our children's by strengthening the skills and relationships that help us cope. And our communities can build resilience too by providing services and opportunities that help all families thrive. Supports like these help build a strong foundation for developing brain architecture. So the earlier we can provide them, the better. But the brain is capable of change throughout life, and it's never too late for a tune-up. Coping with and healing from toxic stress takes a lot of effort and support. But we all need the help of others in difficult times. And building resilience and strength in our families and communities is one of the most important investments we can make as a society. In the end, it will help all of us become the parents that we want to be.